going through Hebrews, and last week we were in chapter 3. Last week in chapter 3, Hebrews talks about this promise that God made to the Jewish people of going to the promised land, that he offered them this place where they could go and be free from the slavery that they were in Egypt, free from the harsh treatment that they were receiving as slaves. They could rest from the worry of what's today going to be like, what's the demands going to be on my life, free from the anxiety of how do you raise children in slavery, and what's their future going to look like. All the stuff, that comes with being a slave that none of us can relate to, definitely. The promised land would be a place flowing with milk and honey, a place of great promise. God would bless them in multiple ways, and all they had to do to enter this place of rest was to obey God, just do what he said, believe he would do his part. But they lacked the faith to do that, so they declined God's offer to go into the promised land, which caused an entire generation to wander around for 40 years, like literally aimlessly, just miles from the promised land, and until they all died and the next generation could come in with faith. That's chapter 3. I mean, in a nutshell, there's other stuff in there. But then chapter 4 starts with therefore. So therefore, all of that. Therefore, all the things we just talked about in chapter 3 with the promised land and the rest that God had promised him. Therefore, since the promise, is Hebrews chapter 4, since the promise to enter his rest remains, right? It's still out there. Since it remains, let us beware that none of you, he's talking to the church there, that none of you be found to have fallen short. Okay, we want you to receive this promise, is what the author is saying here. We want you to have this. For we also have received the good news. So have we. They did, so did we. Just as they did. But the message they heard did not benefit them, since they were not united with those who heard it in faith. For we who have believed enter the rest in keeping with what he has said. So I swore in my anger, they will not enter my rest, even though his works have been finished since the foundation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in this way. And on the seventh day God rested from all his works. Again, in that passage, it says, they will never enter my rest. Therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter because of disobedience, he again specifies a certain day, today. He specified this speaking through David after such a long time. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. Therefore, a Sabbath rest remains for God's people. For the person who has entered his rest has rested from his own works, just as God did from his. Let us then make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will fall into the same pattern of disobedience. That's where we're going to stop for today. Actually, my favorite verse is like the very next verse. So I don't know, maybe I'll sneak that in next week. We'll see about that. But this is an interesting a chapter here. And I don't know, if you're anything like me, sometimes when the Hebrews author kind of goes all over the place, sometimes I kind of go like, what are you talking? Like, what are you talking about? So what I'm going to do is, what's the main point of this? Right? It starts off right in verse 1. Therefore, since the promise to enter his rest remains, let us beware that none of you be found to have fallen short. It's all about this rest that God has promised. He promised to Israel, they didn't take it, and now he promises to us. So the big question you have to ask, or at least I do, is what is this rest? What in the world is he talking about with the rest of God? Is it a physical rest? I'm going to let you go to the promised land. You can rest from the slavery that you were in before, or in the Christian realm, you can rest from working so hard to try to please God and impress God and make your way to heaven. You can rest from that. You don't have to do that. Is it a spiritual rest? There's this newness of life that we're promised through Christ, the freedom from the burden of sin, from the bondage of sin. So it's a spiritual rest. Is that what he's talking about? Maybe a mental or emotional rest, a rest from the pain that can be associated with life, anxiety that can sometimes be part of life, stress that has to do with life. Maybe could it be that? Is it an eternal rest? It's heaven. Hey, that's what I think about immediately. Like, hey, go into your eternal rest. Like, hey, here's this promise for you. But then he says, go today. So it's like, okay, well, what's he really talking about here? That was my challenge for this week. I kept studying it, thinking, hey, it's this. And then I'd read more and think, oh, maybe it's that. Maybe it's number 3. Maybe it's number 2. Maybe it's number 4. Could be number 1. So which one is it? Well, I'd suggest the answer is yes. It's all of it. It's some emotional, it's some spiritual, it's some physical, it's some eternal. It's like all of that all wrapped into one, and depending on where you are in your stage of life and what we're talking about at the moment or in this chapter. So now that you have that great theological debate all figured out, we have to go to the next logical question. If this rest is so awesome that God, verse 1 says, I don't want any of you to miss this. Like I hope you all catch this. If it's so good, then how should we respond to this rest that God is offering us? And the first thing I think is the mistake that Israel made. We have to view it as a valid offer. He's really offering this to you. He's offering you real rest. We think, no, it's a fake rest, or it's a kind of rest, or it's just whatever. It's really a rest. Therefore, since the promise to enter this rest remains, let us beware that none of you found to have fallen short. We received the good news just as they did, but the message they heard did not benefit them since they were not united with those who heard it. God offered Israel this new life. Some of them didn't believe it was a valid offer. Some of them thought, can't we just go back to Egypt? Some of them thought we're doing fine as we don't need to go into the promised land. I mean, it's scary in there, and there's big people and warriors and whatever. So they declined the offer because they didn't think God could take care of his part of the bargain. I want to offer you rest, but we're all going to die going in. It's not valid. That's where many of them are. Now, a lot of you didn't know this, but I have this side hustle where I'm making some extra cash on the side, and it's doing really well. I don't know exactly where I'm at in my bank account, but it was somewhere around 200 million right now in a secret bank account I have. So I have all this money that I'm just rolling in, right? And I thought to myself, I have all this, I should help somebody out. So what I've done is I've written out a check to you for $10 million, right? It's got your name written right on it. It's to you. Who's clapped? It's to you. It's to you. So here's the deal. Here's what you do when you have a check from me for $10 million. First, you might think, whoa, what could I do with $10 million? I mean, you start thinking, you start daydreaming. Yeah, I can do this, I can do that, build a new home, retirement, education, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And secondly, you think, I'm pretty sure he's writing a check that to his bank account can cash, right? I don't think this is valid, right? Any of you think this is valid? Most of you think it's not? You don't believe I have a side hustle that has $200 million? Right? That's kind of your two responses. You're like, yeah, this is great. And secondly, I don't think that's a legitimate check. I don't think that's real. That's what Israel was doing. God said, here's the promised land, a place flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to do all these great things. You're going to rest from your labor. And they're going, man, that would be great. I don't think he can do that. I don't think God can handle that. And what Hebrews is telling us is that God wrote this check. Israel looked at it and said, I don't think so. And so God says, guess what? It's still on the table. It's still valid. It's got your name on it. This is for you, church. This is for you, Christian. I want you to have this. It's still valid. Wouldn't it be a shame to not cash that check? Now, our promise is not the promised land. Why worry about some little piece of land in a far away place? I don't want to move. Everything's great here. Right? So we have a better blessing. The blessings we have in Jesus Christ is I can rest from the bondage and the burden of sin. Whatever I have done in the past, whatever mistakes I've made, whether it was real or intentional, or accidental, or I accidentally drove a bus into whatever, but whatever it is, I can be free from carrying that burden through Christ, Yeah, but when I was in junior high, nope, you can be free. Yeah, but when I was in college, nope. You can be free from that burden, Jesus says, the scripture says. We can rest from the labor of trying to impress God all the time. You know, I just need to work harder, I need to do more, I need to do more. Now, we might want to do more out of service and honor and respect, but not to impress God. We don't have to have that burden of, I'm just trying to be good enough to make it to heaven. You'll never be good enough. You can rest. You can rest from that. We can rest in the peace and joy and the love that comes from believing in Him. I mean, no matter what happens around me, I can have peace in any situation. That comes through Jesus Christ. You can have that. But if you notice, the key element of receiving this blessing, whether it's the promised land or whether it is the rest that we are promised, the key element here is faith. You have to believe that God has the ability to cash this check. That's a key part of this whole. Do you believe God is who He says He is? Do you believe God can do the things that the Bible says that He can do and that He will do? Now, God never promises you won't have turmoil in your life. I mean, life is full of turmoil. God doesn't say that your person will win the election every time and every cycle and every election that comes by. He doesn't say that your values will be shared by the entire nation, that people will celebrate when you put something on social media and they're all going to clap and say, that is outstanding. I've never heard anything better. You are great. I love it when you say things about God. Nowhere does God promise that. He never says your job will be easy or that money will flow effortlessly, I can't even say it, into your life. That's not a promise of God. But God does says He's going to take care of you in good times and bad. He does say He will take care of you no matter who is the elected official over you, mayor, governor, president, whatever person's been elected last. It doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have, God's still going to take care of you. It doesn't matter if people do whatever to you, that God will be there with you through all of that. If people love you because of your faith or hate you because of your faith, that doesn't matter. God's still with you, and He will help you in those times. Now, if you believe that, if you, really believe that God has the ability to help you in those times, you will cash that check and accept that God's in control no matter what's happening around you. Even though it seems like chaos, even though it seems like things are in turmoil, even though the whole world seems like it's crumbling, you're like, okay, God's got this, so I can relax. I don't have to be tense. I don't have to lose sleep. I don't have to, run around like a chicken with my head cut off, panicking. I can be okay because God's in control. It gives you peace in bad times. It gives you a lack of fear when logic says to be very, very afraid. It gives you contentment when you think you don't have enough. And you will quietly know that God is in control even in the biggest storms. The offer of this rest is on the table. It's right there. It's a valid offer, and it stands today. And all it takes is the faith to accept it. Now, I understand faith can be risky. It takes faith. God said, I'm going to hand the promised land over to you, and the Israelites are going, yeah, but people live there now. We don't just walk in and say, hey, God said, and they're all going to quietly move away. There's going to be some conflict involved. And those people are trained warriors, and they've been around. We've just been slaves. What do we know? There was some risk involved. It would take faith to go up against those warriors, the faith that the people did not have, which is why they declined the offer. Now, history tells us 40 years later, when those people were gone, the new generation came up, they had faith in God. They said, okay, God, whatever you say, I'll do. They had their issues and ups and downs and stuff, but God said, hey, go ahead and walk around this city 7 times. Blow your horns. Like, what? That's weird. They just did it. They took faith to do it, and Jericho walls fell down. God took care of that battle. They didn't. It wasn't their military mastermind. It was God saying, I told you I'd give you the promised land. It took faith to do what He said. Or the time when God said, when Moses, go up on the hill and raise your hands. Basically, I want you to pray for the battle going on below. When your hands are raised, you will win. When it's lowered, you won't. And that's exactly what happened. He'd be raising his hands, he was praying, and then he'd get tired. Like, oh, man, I already prayed, And then people started losing, and they had to even get 2 people to help hold his hands up, like, okay, whatever. It was a faith thing there. The battle was in faith. It took action as well. And the book of Hebrews is telling us, have faith, take God's offer of rest seriously. He really means it, but you can decline it. just like Israel did. You can choose to live a life in anxiety. You can choose to live in a life of fear. You can choose to live in guilt, knowing that you haven't done enough to please God because, well, you never can. Or you can go ahead and cash that check and be free from all of that. You know? That's the offer, and it's valid. When he forgives your sins, they're really gone. When he gives you hope, there's legitimate, true hope. When he gives you peace, you can truly say, you know, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. But you got to take it up, and there's faith involved with that. A second way to respond to God's offer is to accept it today. I love this. This is like an old-time preacher, which I suppose that means an old-time preacher is more like the author of Hebrews here. But Hebrews chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter because of disobedience, he again specifies a certain day, today. Do it today. He specified this speaking through David after such a long time. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Classic preacher. Choose it today. Do it today. Don't wait. Not tomorrow. Don't do it next week. Don't do it later. Don't do it after college. Don't do it, sometime in the future. It's today. If rest, peace, freedom is what you need and want in life, what are you waiting for? Here's the check. Sliding it across the table to you. Why would you wait for tomorrow? Why go through the anxiety? Why live in fear? Why live in regret? Why be in bondage to sin? Why have the world control you when I'm giving you rest? Take my offer and do it today. Stop worrying, stop fretting, stop fearing. Trust God to take care of you starting today. Now, legitimately, there are things in this world right now that concern me. You? Anybody? Anything concern you? Anything? Yeah. There's plenty of things. Turn on the news. Anytime in my lifetime, you can turn on the news and find things that will concern you. There's always something out there. The world is literally changing before our eyes. It has been for decades, so it's not like it suddenly has happened, right? Things that once were good are now called evil. Things that are evil are now called good. What was up is now down. What's down is up. It's just in constant turmoil. The rules are redefining before our very eyes. There are people out there who honestly believe with all their heart that the worst people on the planet who are guilty of all the hardship in life are white Christian males. Guess what I am? I'm evil. There are people who literally would celebrate if they saw me tortured to death and drugged through the streets just because I'm white, Christian, and male. Some of you are too. That's just what we live in. Now, I can live in fear. I can worry about driving down the road, what's someone going to think, and what's someone going to do, what's going to happen. I can do that. I can dwell on it, and I can try to run and hide, and I can let it paralyze me. Or God has his offer on the table. You know what? Let me free you from all that. Here you go. Why would I wait? Oh, I want hardship another week or two. I want to really feel the anxiety for another month. Why? He has this offer. Let me carry the burden for you. Let me worry about what you're worried about. Let me take that. You rest easy. Do you trust me? Do you really trust me? If you do, take the offer. I happen to trust him. I just don't get worked up about stuff. I do sometimes. I'm human. I have my moments, right? But for the most part, I just don't get worked up about stuff. What happens if I die? Heaven? Anybody? Nobody? Right? What if I get a really bad diagnosis? You can go on down the list. Why would I worry about that? Why would I live in fear about that? What happens if our nation completely flips upside down? I'll do what I can to stop that from happening, but if I can't, guess who's still God? God. Guess what? There's a lot of people in other nations that are already upside down, and God's over there, and he's working just fine. I'm going to rest and be peaceful and let God do what it was. I'll do what I can do too, but I'm going to not stress about things. What if we have another great leap forward like happened in China just a few decades ago? When people like me, or people, anyone in education, anyone, professionals were like riders would pull up to their house and pull them out of the streets and beat them and kill them and sometimes and torture them. And I read about I think it was a piano teacher, some type of musician who was a teacher, taught generations of musicians in China. And they went to his house, and he was this great guy, this great teacher, and they pulled him out, and they broke his fingers and sliced his fingers so that he could never play instruments again. And I don't remember if this guy they killed or not, but they beat him to within inches if they didn't. And there's stories, the Great Leap Forward. The whole point was to erase a generation so that those who were uneducated could just forget anything ever happened, and then those in control could control. That was awful. The church thrives today. If I'm the one who's pulled out, that's why I play dumb all the time. It's not that I am. In case there's another great leap forward, they'll say, oh, no, that guy. Why worry about it? Why fret about that? I'll let God worry about that. And if it happens, it happens. And I'll deal with whatever happens whenever it happens. So just where are we at? Accept it today. Today is the thing. That's what the author of Hebrews is writing to Christians. He was writing at a time when it was unpopular to be a Christian. It wasn't like everybody was celebrating, oh, you're a Christian. It was difficult. It was challenging for them. And he tells the believer, God's rest is on the table. Don't waste any more time worrying about stuff. Take up this offer. I'm giving it to you. Now, you can decline it. It's up to you. But why? Why decline it when I'm giving it to you? The third way to respond to God's offer of rest is to try really hard. Because sometimes you do have to try a little harder than others. Sometimes you do. Verse 8, for if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. Therefore, a Sabbath rest remains for God's people, us, right? For the person who has entered his rest has rested from his own works, just as God did from his. Let us then make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will fall into the same pattern of disobedience. Make every effort. Sometimes I do have to try harder than others. Sometimes I do let stuff get to me and get me down. For the most part, I'm pretty relaxed. For the most part, it's like the water on a duck thing. I just figure God's got this. But there are times it does get to me, and I have to try a little bit harder than other times. And I have to keep reminding myself to trust God. God's got this. God's got this. Don't worry about it. God's got this. Sitting there not sleeping. God's got this. Go to sleep. Oh, okay. And then you go to sleep. Sometimes you have to try a little bit harder. When I take spiritual gifts inventory tests, if you've ever done one of those, it's kind of like personality tests, but it's spiritual gifts. One of the top 3 gifts I always get is the gift of faith. I honestly believe that God will do what he says. I just know. I don't sit there and fret. You think he can really do this? I really believe I would have been one of the guys who at the Promised Land said, well, when everybody was saying, look at the giants, I would say, what are you guys waiting for? Let's go. God said to do it. So, why wouldn't we? That's just kind of how I'm wired spiritually. So when, things just don't bother me a whole lot. Many of you know I had a life-threatening issue a number of years ago that popped up, and the doctor said, don't lift anything over 5 pounds, you're going to die, and then descending aortic aneurysm, it's going to blow at any moment, and go to a surgeon. I went to the surgeon, and yeah, you really ought to have a surgery. There's people who would do it. I want to wait a year. And so I had this year of thinking, well, I'll probably die today. I literally thought that every single day. But I wasn't that worried about it. It was actually kind of a revival for me. Every day was like, hey, I see Jesus. Because of a faith thing. I genuinely believed that dying wasn't negative. I genuinely believe that when the day does come, whether it's now or in 10 years or 30 years, whatever it is, I'm just not worried about it. It's going to be just fine. Because if I die, well, I go to heaven. There's not a downside there. If I have surgery, well, it's going to change my life. He said I could find someone if I went to another surgeon. He said, I guarantee you people will do surgery. You're at that place, they would do surgery, no doubt. He says, I want to wait. If I would have done it, I would change, it would alter a few things in my life, but I would deal with it. Like, oh, okay, if I need surgery, I'll do surgery. I came prepared with a date when we went to see the surgeon of when I'd like to do it. It's just what it is. I couldn't think of a single scenario that got me riled up in that thing, other than, like I said, it really was a revival for me because I was like, ooh, Jesus, We're going to have that meeting, aren't we? This is going to be cool. Turns out the doctors now, because they tested and they disappeared, now it's been years, right? It's been a long time. And every year, now it's like every 2 years, they keep moving it because they're like, we don't know what to do with you. Like, we can't remove the diagnosis because you can't remove that diagnosis, but it's not there. And I'm like, oh, God does what he wants. I mean, I just don't, sorry. Sorry you don't have the aneurysm. Maybe one day it'll happen and all of a sudden it'll come back and I'll go, but whatever. And I'm just not worried about it. It's a faith thing. It's a faith thing. I don't care. Now, not everybody handles faith that way, and I get that. It's not that easy for a lot of people. So Hebrews is telling us if it doesn't come easy, then try a little harder. If you're really scared about it, keep giving. Maybe you got to keep giving it to God. Keep reminding God, man, I'm really worried about this. Can you take this? Can you take this? Try really hard to trust God. Jesus says, my burden is light. He says, cast your anxiety on me. I've got this. I've got this. The stuff of life, give it to me. I've got this. When he says that, I believe he really does. That doesn't mean I get worked up. Don't get worked up once in a while. Sometimes I have to try a little bit harder. So when panic sits in, if you have a depression that sets in, if you start feeling like things are spinning out of control, then I encourage you to use it, then pray. Get that, use that as a time to pray and say, okay, God, I want to be a person, help me have faith. I want to be a person of faith. Help me believe you've got this. I know the scripture says you've got this. I know you've got this, but I'm scared. Tell him that. Tell him that. I'm trying to cast my anxiety on you. I don't even know how to do that. Show me how to do that. And he'll be, and you might have to pray that every 5 minutes for a while at times. You may have to only pray it once a day or once a week or once a month or once a year. I don't know. Who knows? Depends on the situation. But I think that's how you try harder. You can't just force yourself, I'm going to be okay. You've got to, sometimes you just got to give it over to him. It's that trust thing. God, you've given me this big old monster check here, and I believe you have the funds in there to cash this. I believe when you say cast your anxiety, you really mean you'll take that. I believe you really want me to enter your rest, physically and spiritually and emotionally, someday ultimately heaven. That's the goal. That's ultimately where I'm headed. So whatever happens in life, I'm good. I'm good. But sometimes I need to be reminded, and sometimes I need help, a little extra help. So I would encourage you, anytime that feeling comes back, if it's you, and it will, because you're human, you're living life, and then you'll have a moment, you just will, go back to that prayer. God, I give you my anxiety. Show me how to give you my anxiety. I believe, help me believe. It's that faith thing. Life is too short to live it in this ball of anxiety and stress and pain and bondage, especially when he's saying, I just want you to have freedom. That's what I offer you freedom. I encourage you to go ahead and cash that check.